Okay, so just to highlight some of these things, I also want to point out that during this time here, okay, there was the phony war again in Europe, and that's because, the French were hiding behind that Maginot Line that they loved so much and cherished so much. So that's something important to remember. When they start to go after the British, it's also could be known as the London Blitz. Stalingrad, bloodiest war ever in history. I'm sorry, bloodiest battle in the history of man. Pretty nasty. Hitler was really determined to take it, and Stalin was really determined to defend it. Obviously, it had his name in it. So, life expectancy in the battle was like 2 hours, and that's pretty crazy to realize. Blitzkrieg at this point was no longer useful, so there's no more surprise, and the supplies were low, and eventually that's why the Germans were not successful in Russia. It was due to a lot of factors with the climate, the weather, the supplies, far from home, and your strategy that was working in the beginning is no longer useful here. Plus, on the other hand, the Russians had several different tactics. One was not a step back. If you saw the clip from Enemy at the Gates, you would understand the harsh reality soldiers had as Russians going into battle without a gun but with bullets, and then if they do retreat, they were shot by their own members of the Red Army. So this was super crazy, and the Soviets with this strategy executed 13,000 of their own soldiers in the troops. And throughout the Russian battles, we see a lot of rat war, is what it's known, and you're battling for staircases, kitchens, living rooms for days. And with this, the Axis power lost about a quarter of their manpower, and they were never able to recover. And while this was also happening, Italy was getting invaded, which we'll see the execution of Mussolini coming up with that. So we see other battles happening in North Africa trying to get through Italy to get into Germany. And, a lot of these different ways that they tried were successful. We see the DDay Invasion in France, allowing them to get into the Battle of the Bulge over here. Soviet Union comes in from the east. And then, of course, the Allied troops coming from North Africa through Italy is going to eventually make their way in. And this is a pretty harsh picture here, but Mussolini and his mistress, it was her decision to go with him, were captured and executed by their own Italian, citizens, if you would call them citizens under a dictatorship. So they hanged them in the streets as a sign of their changing of their loyalty to the totalitarian leader. So we also have the Battle of Leningrad, which is a pretty crazy battle as well, which you can go into and learn. I just want to get through all of this, so I'm going to just keep going here. Whoops. There are several meetings where they call it the Big Three meet. There's the Tehran Conference, there's the Potsdam Conference. So the first one, actually, we're going to talk about is the Tehran Conference, which is basically their initial plans to defeat Germany, and then what's going to happen to Germany after World War II, and they're going to divide it up. So, and we'll get to that during the Cold War, because that's going to be a huge thing there. And here we see the D-Day Invasion, which was also known as the Battle of Normandy. And on the beach, there was over 5 million mines, which you could assume would do some damage to the Allied troops. This is the largest seaborne invasion in history. And their goal is to basically get France back. The good part for the Allied troops was that one of the generals of the German army was away with his wife for her 50th birthday, and that was General Rommel. So because of that, the German commander wasn't around, and then the German armies, they were waiting for Hitler's okay, but he was sleeping, and so the Allied troops were a little bit more successful than they might have been if the Germans were prepared. Also, the Germans thought that the Allied powers were going to come on a different beach, so it also stumped the Germans with this. Here's another conference, the Yalta Conference, and this was the plan for what we're going to do with Europe when the war is over. And, you know, again, it's them working as a team together, although it is known that there is tensions going on between, you know, this democratic feeling versus this communist feeling. So the plan was that Germany was going to be split into several different countries. Several different zones. And you're supposed to allow for free elections to occur in each of those zones. But, you know, this is another situation where Stalin's like, yeah, sure, that's what we'll do. And then it doesn't actually pan out that way. And if you also notice, there's another little split up here in the Soviet Union's piece. That's the city of Berlin. They actually wanted to split the city of Berlin into 4 zones as well. And again, more to come later when we get into the Cold War about that. And at that conference, they also agreed to enter into the United Nations. And so the Allied powers get closer and closer into Germany, and the Soviet army will capture Berlin. And in and around this time, Hitler is going to, commit suicide. And his girlfriend is also going to commit suicide. And they actually had gotten married within, that day or, the night before. So I guess you can call her his wife. But anyway, with Hitler killing himself, the leader, it's kind of like without your figurehead, a lot of the Nazis felt lost. And the Germans will sign an unconditional surrender to the Allies, which gives us VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. But you gotta remember, we still got the Pacific Theater going on here. And the United States is heavily involved in the Pacific Theater. And when the United States starts coming in here, we all see the Soviet Union making its way towards Manchuria and other locations there. One of the biggest battles was the Battle of Midway here. This was a huge turning point for us because it was like one of our first big wins, and it got us closer and closer to the mainlands of Japan, which allowed us to island hop, which was one of the strategies for us to create a base on each island that we gained access to. We talked a lot about the kamikazes in class, so I'm just going to go through these. And again, some fun facts. Not that this is fun, but some of them weren't volunteers. They were strapped in. Some of the planes didn't have their full tank of gas, so it's a one-stop flight, so they're not going to waste gas or oil on this venture. And again, kamikaze actually means the divine wind. It goes back to the historical moments of the Mongols versus the Japanese, and the Mongols trying to take Japan but failing due to the wind that caused some nasty storm weather. And the Japanese, from that point, always felt they were protected by God, and they called it the kamikaze. Whoops. Now, this was a famous picture of the Bataan Death March, a soldier, a POW, getting executed along the march. And we talked about that before, so I'm not going to go in depth again about it. So now we have a situation where the Allies have to make a decision whether do we go on the mainland with our troops, or do we use this bomb that nobody has ever used before, ever in the history of man? And they didn't even know what kind of repercussions were going to happen with using this. So other battles did occur while they were deciding this and how they were going to do it. And they eventually do drop the bombs, as we all know. Some other battles, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, that are pretty important to the whole scheme of things. Iwo Jima, actually, in English, it means sulfur, because it smells pretty bad on there, believe it or not, on that island. But 1 and 3 were killed who were involved in this battle, and it was a 36-day battle. But this island was important because it was 350 miles away from the mainland of Japan. There's some photographs. And we did firebomb Tokyo. So, and you know, as you can see, as you can see in this chart here, although the nuclear weapons that we used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were atrocious in the effects as well, the firebombing of Tokyo killed more people than each of the bombs that we dropped. Yeah. Okay, so here's some more slides here. The Manhattan Project mentioned earlier was the project by which, you know, Albert Einstein and some other awesome geniuses got together and they created a lethal weapon that they actually regretted creating or helping to create later. Just for time's sake, I'm just going to let you look at these and pause them at your own pace and read the details here. You know, FDR in this moment is going to pass away due to polio, and Truman is going to move up in the ranking from VP to president. And many people, you know, historians, they argue over whether or not if FDR hadn't died, would we have dropped the bombs, because FDR apparently might not have been as into dropping them as Truman was. And here we go, another big three moment. Although FDR is no longer a part of it, we have Truman here representing the United States. We have the Potsdam Conference, in which they're discussing, okay, now that we got the European theater over with, how are we going to end the Pacific theater? And you know, if you do your homework, you would know that the United States and the Big Three did attempt to ask Japan for their surrender, but knowing the mentality of the Japanese, this is a situation where they don't usually surrender. So how are we going to make them surrender? And unfortunately, it was with the atomic bombs. So, you know, after the initial bomb, several days went by, we attacked Nagasaki, and then after that bomb, finally, Emperor Hirohito agreed to a surrender, and we have VJ Day, which is victory in Japan, and World War II is officially over, and so is this.